The powerful alpha crashed my birthday party and demanded a wedding. The grand hall of Eldoria's royal palace sparkled under hundreds of crystal chandeliers. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint aroma of roasted meats and sweet pastries. Leora's 18th birthday had been anticipated for months, and tonight was meant to be a night of laughter, music, and fleeting joy. Noblemen and noblewomen in silken gowns and polished armor filled the ballroom, their voices forming a soft hum of excitement. Leora stood at the center of the room, her dress a pale lavender that shimmered like moonlight. Her heart fluttered with nervous delight, hoping for a night of happiness and celebration. Yet, despite the cheerful chatter, she sensed a subtle unease in the air, as if something unseen was stirring just beyond the golden doors. The orchestra played a delicate melody, and the courtiers swayed gently to the rhythm. Leora smiled politely at her friends, her laughter soft but forced. She felt a prickle at the back of her neck, a shiver that made her pause and glance toward the main entrance. Nothing seemed amiss, and yet the feeling lingered, growing heavier with each passing moment. Then the doors burst open. The hall fell into stunned silence as a figure stepped through, tall and commanding, cloaked in shadows. His presence seemed to absorb the light around him, and every eye in the room turned toward him. Leora's breath caught in her throat. He was not like any visitor the palace had ever seen. His eyes were dark, sharp, and deep, like twin storms, and they seemed to pierce through her very soul. Kale, the alpha of the Moonshade Pack, had arrived. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some spoke of his legendary strength, others of the fear he inspired in those who had crossed his path. Few dared to approach him, for he carried an aura of authority so absolute that even kings and queens trembled. Yet tonight, all eyes and hearts were fixed on Leora. Kale's gaze fell on her, unyielding, intense, and possessive. He did not speak at first, allowing silence to stretch and grow uncomfortable. The music halted, the laughter died, and even the servants froze in place. Then, in a voice that was both commanding and strangely melodic, he said, "You belong to me." The words sent a shiver through the room. Leora's hands trembled as she stepped back instinctively, her mind racing. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely audible. What are you?" Kale's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I am the Alpha, and you are the one the prophecy spoke of, the one who will bind the pack and end the curse that has haunted my family for centuries. You are mine, by right of destiny." Gasps erupted among the courtiers. Some whispered of curses and ancient prophecies, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Leora's pulse raced. She had always known her life was special, filled with dreams and possibilities, but she had never imagined it could lead to something like this. A man of terrifying power claiming her before an entire kingdom. "I don't belong to anyone," Leora declared, her voice stronger now, though it trembled with fear. "I am my own person, and no prophecy can force me into anything." Kale's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, though his presence remained overwhelming. He took a slow step toward her, the sound of his boots echoing like thunder in the silent hall. "It is not a matter of force, Leora," he said. "It is a matter of fate. Your courage, your spirit, your very being, they are tied to mine. You will come with me, whether you wish it or not." The hall seemed to shrink around them, the crowd unsure whether to flee or intervene. Leora's mind raced, trying to find a way to escape, to refuse, to deny the force that now loomed over her. But something in Kale's eyes unsettled her, not just fear but a strange pull, as if part of her had always known him, always belonged to this moment. Before anyone could react, Kale reached for her hand. The touch was electric and Leora's breath caught. His hand was warm and strong, yet careful, almost reverent. "Do not resist me out of fear," he murmured. "Resist me if you must, but understand that you have already chosen a path you do not yet see." Leora pulled back, shaking her head, tears pricking her eyes. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her voice breaking. I am not yours. Kale's expression hardened, his voice steady but commanding. Tonight, the choice is not yours alone. The bond has awakened. It recognizes you. It has chosen you. A sudden hush fell over the room as the magic of his words seemed to ripple through the air. Leora felt a strange pull, a sensation that was impossible to resist yet terrifying to acknowledge. The guests exchanged nervous glances, some fearful, others awestruck. The Alpha's presence was like a storm contained within a man, and it threatened to sweep everything away. Leora's father, the Lord of Eldoria, stepped forward, his face pale but proud. "Kale, this is my daughter's birthday," he said, his voice firm but quivering. "She is not your possession. Leave now or face the consequences." Kale's eyes flickered toward him, a shadow of amusement crossing his features. "Consequences, perhaps," he replied. "But fate does not heed consequences, Lord Eldoria. It only demands truth." The tension in the hall was suffocating. Leora felt trapped between the safety of her familiar life and the unknown power that had entered her world. Her heart ached with confusion, fear, and something unfamiliar, a spark of curiosity, a flicker of something forbidden yet impossible to ignore. Kale's gaze returned to her, unwavering, intense. "You are the only one who can end the curse that has haunted my pack for centuries," he said softly, yet every word carried weight. "And I will claim you, not out of cruelty, but because it is the only way to save them, to save us both." Leora's chest tightened. She wanted to run, to deny the pull she felt, yet she could not look away from him. The crowd began to whisper, their voices a soft murmur of speculation and fear. For the first time, Leora realized the enormity of the moment. Her life had changed forever in an instant. I cannot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands trembled and she took a step backward, her eyes never leaving his. "I do not even know you." Kale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, a rare flicker of vulnerability passing across his features. "You will," he said quietly. "In time you will understand. Tonight is only the beginning." Suddenly the doors slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a warning. The guests recoiled, unsure whether to flee or intervene. Leora felt a strange heat in her chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity, as Kale's presence seemed to fill every corner of the room. "Leave me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Kale stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like a cloak. "I cannot," he said simply. "Not when the bond has awakened, not when destiny calls." The music started again, but it was hollow now, a fragile attempt to mask the tension that had filled the room. Leora's friends tried to reach her, but she felt trapped in a world that had shifted in an instant, a world where power, destiny, and an unspoken bond threatened to define her life. Kale's eyes softened again, and for a moment Leora saw something behind the storm of authority, a glimpse of loneliness, of pain, of a heart that had carried centuries of burden. And despite her fear, she felt a strange pull toward him, a connection she could not explain. "Tonight," he murmured, "you have been chosen. The path is not yet clear, but the journey has begun. You may resist, but know this, our fates are entwined." Before anyone could react further, Kale turned and strode toward the doors, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow of night. The hall was silent, the guests frozen in awe and fear. Leora stood rooted to the spot, her mind a storm of confusion and curiosity, her heart pounding in a rhythm she could not control. And then, as the last echoes of his footsteps faded, she felt it, a strange, undeniable truth settling in her chest. Kale was not just a threat, not just a legend. He was the beginning of a story that would change her life forever. Cliffhanger. As the doors closed behind him, Leora's pulse quickened. A whisper of wind carried his words through the hall, soft and persistent. "You are the only one who can end this curse, and I will claim you whether you wish it or not." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a strange, forbidden intrigue. Somehow, she knew, her life had just been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same. The forest of Moonshade was alive with shadows. Its trees stretched tall and twisted toward the sky, their dark leaves whispering secrets to each other in the wind. Leora's heart pounded as she followed Kale along a narrow path, her hands trembling slightly. Every step took her further from the familiar safety of Eldoria and deeper into a world she could barely understand. Kale walked beside her, his presence a constant and overwhelming force. His steps were silent, yet each one seemed to echo in Leora's chest. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small but firm. "To my home," Kale replied, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of command. "You must see the truth of your destiny there." Leora swallowed hard. The word destiny sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to resist, to turn back, but something in Kale's eyes held her in place. It was not just power, it was certainty, a conviction that left her breathless. As they walked, Kale began to explain the ancient curse that bound his family. "For centuries," he said, his voice low, almost mournful, "the Moonshade Pack has carried a curse. It is said that without a chosen mate, the pack's strength fades and the bloodline is doomed to loneliness and loss. You, Leora, are that mate." Leora's eyes widened. "Mate? What does that mean? I don't understand." Kale's gaze softened, though it remained intense. "It does not mean what you fear. It is not ownership, nor is it imprisonment. It is a bond that can only be broken by true choice. The curse will not be lifted by force alone. It requires willingness, trust, and courage." The forest grew darker as the moon rose high above the canopy. Shadows danced across Kale's face, revealing moments of vulnerability behind his usual command. Leora realized for the first time that he was not simply a figure of legend or terror. He was a man carrying centuries of burden, haunted by the mistakes and losses of his family. They reached a clearing, where a great stone fortress rose from the mist. Its towers were tall and imposing, yet there was a strange beauty in its dark architecture. The walls were etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the moonlight, a reminder of the ancient magic that lingered here. "This is where you will stay," Kale said, gesturing toward the fortress. "You must understand the power you are tied to and the danger that surrounds it." Leora hesitated at the threshold. The fortress seemed to breathe, alive with the weight of centuries. But despite her fear, curiosity pushed her forward. She entered, her steps echoing in the cold stone halls. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with herbs and earth. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting battles, alliances, and rituals of old. Every corner of the fortress seemed to hum with magic, a silent witness to the lives of those who had walked here before. Kale led her to a chamber filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts. "Here," he said, "you will learn about the curse and the path to breaking it. Knowledge is as important as courage. You must understand the bond fully before it can be embraced." Leora looked around, her fear slowly giving way to awe. She could see the weight of responsibility in Kale's eyes, and for the first time she felt a flicker of compassion for him. This man, so powerful and feared, carried a burden far heavier than she had imagined. Over the next days, Leora began to learn. She studied the history of the Moonshade Pack, the details of the curse, and the rituals that could strengthen or weaken it. Kale was a patient teacher, guiding her with care, though his presence was always a quiet force that demanded attention. At first, Leora resisted him. She reminded herself that she had a life in Eldoria, that she was her own person, and that destiny was not something to be forced upon her. Yet, the more she learned, the more she realized that some forces were beyond her control. The bond between her and Kale was awakening, subtle but undeniable. One evening, as the silver moonlight filtered through the tall windows, Leora found herself standing by the frozen stream that ran through the fortress grounds. The water glistened like glass, and she saw Kale kneeling at its edge, his reflection distorted in the ice. He did not notice her at first. When he finally looked up, his expression was different, vulnerable, almost painfully so. "I have carried this burden for centuries," he said softly. "I have led my pack, fought my enemies, and yet I have always been alone. Until you." Leora's heart ached. She could feel the weight of his loneliness, the depth of his longing, and the unspoken pain that had hardened his heart. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, yet fear still held her back. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why not someone stronger, someone braver?" Cale smiled faintly, a shadow of sadness in his eyes. "Because it is not strength alone that can break the curse. It is heart, courage, and choice. You have all of these, whether you know it or not." Leora's chest tightened. The words stirred something within her, a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. She had never imagined that her life could be entwined with someone like Cale, yet now she could not deny the pull between them, subtle but persistent. Days passed, and their bond deepened. Cale's dominance softened into guidance, and Leora's defiance began to blend with respect. She saw glimpses of the man beneath the legend, the pain, the courage, the desire to protect those he loved. And she realized that her fear was slowly transforming into something else, a cautious, reluctant trust. Yet danger was never far away. The curse had enemies, those who sought to exploit the weakness of the Alpha and claim the Moonshade Pack for themselves. One night, as the wind howled through the forest, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Leora's heart raced as Cale's senses sharpened instantly. "They are coming," he said quietly, his voice tense. "A rival pack has discovered you. They will test us, and they will not show mercy." Leora felt a surge of fear, but also determination. She could no longer run from the reality of her situation. The bond, the curse, the Alpha, they were all part of a story she could not escape. And now, for the first time, she understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. Cale stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "Do not be afraid," he whispered. "Whatever happens, we face it together. The bond is stronger than any enemy, stronger than any curse." Leora nodded, her hands trembling but steady. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this bond, terrifying and overwhelming as it was, could also be a source of strength, of courage, and of something she had never dared to imagine: love. That night, as they stood by the frozen stream, the wind carrying the distant sound of the forest, Leora felt the first true stirrings of her heart. Fear and longing twisted together in a knot she could not unravel. Cale's presence was both comforting and dangerous, a paradox she could not ignore. And then, as the moonlight reflected on the ice, Leora saw him kneeling, speaking a name that she did not recognize, yet that seemed filled with sorrow and longing. Her pulse quickened, her curiosity igniting despite the fear that gripped her. Before she could speak, a howl echoed through the forest, sharp, distant, and chilling. Cale's eyes darkened and his posture stiffened. "They are closer than I feared," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have little time. You must prepare yourself." Leora's breath caught. She felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. The journey she had begun with reluctance now demanded courage she was unsure she possessed. And yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward Cale, nor the strange, unexplainable connection that bound them together. Cliffhanger. As the wind swept through the trees, carrying the distant sound of approaching danger, Cale turned to her, his expression a mixture of resolve and unspoken longing. "Tonight," he said, "you will see what the world is truly capable of, and whether your heart is ready to choose." Leora's heart pounded in her chest, her mind a whirl of fear, curiosity, and an emotion she could not yet name. She realized, with a mixture of dread and anticipation, that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The Alpha, the bond, the curse, they had already begun to change her, and the night ahead promised to test everything she thought she knew about courage, destiny, and the limits of her own heart. The moon hung low over the forest of Moonshade, casting silver light across the frost-covered ground. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Leora's pulse raced, her fingers gripping the edge of her cloak. She had learned much in the days since she arrived at Kale's fortress, about the curse, the Alpha's strength, and the bond that tied them together, but nothing could have prepared her for what was coming. A sudden howl shattered the stillness. Leora's heart leapt into her throat. Kale's eyes snapped toward the sound, dark and fierce, every muscle in his body coiled like a predator ready to strike. "They're here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A rival pack has come to test the bond, to challenge my authority. We have little time." Fear and determination surged through Leora at once. She had spent days learning about courage, about trust, about the strength that could come from facing the unknown. Now, it was no longer theory, it was real, and she could not turn away. Kale led her to the fortress gates, the heavy stone doors trembling as the wind howled around them. Outside, shadows moved in the moonlight, figures of a rival pack, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, their intentions clear and dangerous. Leora's breath caught as she realized the reality of her situation. This was not a test of magic or prophecy alone. It was a test of courage, of heart, of the bond between them. "Stay close to me," Kale commanded, his voice steady despite the tension. "Do not falter. Trust the bond and it will guide you." The rival pack attacked swiftly, their movements precise and coordinated. Leora froze for a moment, fear threatening to paralyze her, but Kale's presence beside her was like a shield. His hand brushed hers briefly, a silent reminder that she was not alone. Drawing on the knowledge she had gained, Leora moved with surprising agility. She dodged, ducked, and used the terrain to her advantage, her mind sharp despite the fear that raced through her. Kale fought with unmatched strength, his movements fluid, powerful, and precise. Yet he did not leave her behind. Every glance he cast was a reminder that she was part of the battle, part of the bond, and part of the strength he carried. Amid the chaos, Leora saw something she had never expected: the Alpha's vulnerability. He did not fight as a heartless warrior, but as someone burdened with centuries of responsibility and pain. Each strike he made was calculated, yet tempered by care, as if he feared not for himself, but for those he sought to protect. Leora's heart ached with a mixture of admiration and something she could not name. The battle raged on, shadows and silver moonlight dancing across the forest floor. Leora moved instinctively, guided by the bond she felt with Kale. She realized that the connection between them was more than prophecy or curse. It was trust, courage, and a shared heartbeat that seemed to synchronize in the heat of the fight. At one point, a figure from the rival pack lunged at Kale from behind. Leora reacted without thought, throwing herself in front of him. The movement was instinctive, yet deliberate, a choice she had made without fear or hesitation. Kale's eyes widened, a flash of surprise and admiration crossing his face. "You are stronger than you realize," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper as they fought side by side. "This bond, it makes us both stronger." Despite the danger, Leora felt a thrill of empowerment. She was no longer just the frightened girl from Eldoria's ballroom. She was part of something larger, something ancient and powerful. The fear that had once held her captive now mingled with courage, determination, and a strange, unspoken bond that tied her to the Alpha beside her. The rival pack was relentless, their numbers pressing against them like a tide. Yet Leora and Kale moved with a silent understanding, each anticipating the other's actions. In the midst of the fight, Leora realized that her own courage had grown, not through training alone, but through the trust she had placed in Kale and in herself. Finally, as dawn began to creep over the horizon, the rival pack retreated, their howls echoing through the forest like a warning. The frost on the ground sparkled in the morning light, and the forest seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it all night. Leora collapsed onto the cold ground, her chest heaving, sweat and frost mingling on her skin. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. For the first time, his mask of dominance softened completely, revealing the man beneath, the alpha who carried centuries of pain, yet found something unexpected in her courage. "You were incredible," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I knew you were strong, but tonight, you proved it to me, not just your strength but your heart." Leora's cheeks flushed. I was just trying to survive," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "But I didn't expect this." Kale's gaze held hers, unwavering, intense, yet gentle. "This is only the beginning. You have awakened something within me, something I thought was lost forever. Your courage, your spirit, it is more powerful than any enemy, any curse, any darkness I have faced." The words sent a shiver through Leora, not of fear, but of something she could not quite name. The bond between them was no longer just prophecy. It was real, tangible, and growing stronger with every heartbeat. For a long moment they sat in silence, the forest around them quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves. Leora realized that her fear had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It was no longer paralyzing. It was a reminder of the stakes, of the courage required, and of the bond that now tied her to Kale. "Kale," she began, her voice hesitant, "what happens now? The rival pack, will they come back?" Kale's expression darkened slightly. "Perhaps. But we will be ready. The bond we share, it is more than strength. It is trust, understanding, and choice. And you have proven that your heart is as strong as any warrior's blade." Leora's chest tightened at his words. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride, fear, and something far more intimate. She realized with a start that the bond was not just about prophecy or magic. It was about connection, understanding, and the power of two hearts choosing to face the world together. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Kale stood and extended his hand to her. "Come," he said. "There is much you still must learn, and the path ahead will test us both. But tonight, you have taken the first step." Leora took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth in his grasp. The forest seemed alive with possibility, the frost sparkling like silver dust in the early morning light. She realized that fear was no longer her master. Courage, trust, and the bond she shared with Kale had begun to guide her steps. Yet even in that moment of fragile triumph, a shadow lingered at the edge of her thoughts. The curse was not fully broken, the rival pack was still out there, and the bond between her and Kale, though powerful, had not yet been tested to its fullest. Cliffhanger, as they began to walk back toward the fortress, a distant whisper carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. "The final test is coming, and only one heart can choose the path of redemption." Leora's pulse quickened. She glanced at Kale, his expression unreadable, yet she could sense the weight of centuries of responsibility and expectation in his gaze. Their journey was far from over, and the next challenge would demand everything: courage, trust, and the strength of the bond they had begun to forge. Her heart raced with anticipation and fear. She knew now that the Alpha, the curse, and the bond were not just forces of destiny. They were forces that would shape her very soul. And as the wind whispered through the moonshade trees, she realized with a mixture of dread and hope that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The fire within her had awakened, and the path ahead was both terrifying and irresistible. The ruins of the ancient temple rose from the mist like a phantom from another age. Its walls were carved with runes and symbols older than any living memory, whispering secrets of power, curses, and lost kingdoms. The wind swept through the broken arches, carrying the scent of earth, stone, and faint traces of magic long dormant. Leora stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands clenched at her sides, heart pounding. Kale's presence beside her was a calm anchor, yet the tension in the air was undeniable. "This is it," Kale said, his voice low and steady, though his eyes held a rare vulnerability. the source of the curse, and the test that will determine our fate. Leora swallowed hard. The journey had led her here, through fear, trust, and moments of courage she had never thought herself capable of. The bond she shared with Kale had grown stronger with every challenge, yet she knew this moment would demand more than courage. It would demand the truest measure of her heart. The temple doors groaned as they pushed them open. Inside, shadows danced along the walls, cast by flickering torches that seemed to ignite on their own. The air thrummed with power, as though the building itself was alive, aware of their presence. At the center of the chamber, a swirling mass of shadow and light pulsed like a heartbeat. It was the curse made tangible, ancient, angry, and determined to hold its power over Kale's family forever. Leora stepped forward, her hand brushing Kale's. What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kale's expression was resolute. "We face it together. This is not something I can fight alone. The curse responds to the bond, it tests our trust, our courage, and our choice. We must show it that we are united, that our hearts are willing to face what it demands." The shadows stirred, coalescing into a shape that was both familiar and terrifying. It was the form of the sorceress who had cast the curse centuries ago, her eyes glowing with bitterness, her presence filled with power and malice. "You think you can break me?" she hissed, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You, a mortal girl, and you, Alpha, bound by pride and fear." Kale's jaw tightened. "We will not be bound by fear," he said, his voice strong, unwavering. "We are free to choose, and that choice is stronger than any curse you could cast." The sorceress laughed, a sound like cracking ice. Shadows leapt from her form, swirling around the room like tendrils of darkness. Leora's heart raced, but she did not step back. She felt Kale's hand on hers, firm and steady, and the bond between them thrummed with warmth and strength. "Focus on me," Kale said quietly. "Trust the bond, trust yourself." Leora closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt the bond, a tether of courage, trust, and connection that stretched from her heart to Kale's. The fear that had gripped her for so long now seemed distant, replaced by clarity. The curse could only survive if they faltered, if doubt and fear ruled their hearts. But they would not falter. She opened her eyes and stepped forward, placing her hand over Kale's. Together they faced the sorceress. "We choose each other," Leora said, her voice ringing clear and steady. "Not because of fear, not because of fate, but because we choose to face this together." The shadows quivered. The sorceress's form twisted, rage and disbelief flashing across her spectral face. You cannot," she whispered, the tendrils of darkness faltering for the first time. Kale's voice rose, firm and unwavering. "The bond is stronger than your curse. Love, courage, and choice are more powerful than fear, anger, and malice. You will not control us." The shadow shuddered, a sound like breaking stone filling the chamber. The light in the room intensified, the darkness shrinking, until the sorceress's form began to crumble. Leora felt a wave of warmth surge through her, the bond between her and Kale glowing with strength and certainty. The curse, centuries in the making, was breaking. As the final remnants of shadow dissipated, the chamber fell silent. The air was still, heavy with magic that had been released and reshaped. Leora's chest heaved as she looked at Kale. For the first time, the mask of the Alpha's dominance was gone. She saw the man beneath, the pain, the courage, and the heart that had longed for connection. "You did it," she whispered, awe in her voice. Kale shook his head slightly, a soft smile touching his lips. "We did it," he corrected. "The bond, our courage, our choice, it broke the chains, not one alone. You were stronger than you knew, Leora." Her cheeks flushed, and she felt a strange warmth fill her chest. The fear, tension, and uncertainty of the past days had transformed into something new: pride, trust, and a deep, unspoken connection that no words could fully capture. They stepped out of the temple into the first light of dawn. The forest around them seemed renewed, the frost sparkling like diamonds in the early morning sun. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the wind carried the scent of earth and life. Leora felt a sense of peace she had never known, a momentary calm after the storm of fear, battle, and doubt. Kale turned to her, his eyes holding a mixture of tenderness and intensity. "This bond," he said softly, "is not just about the curse. It is about us, our choice, and the life we will build together. You have given me something I thought I had lost forever: hope, trust, and the courage to believe in love again." Leora's heart swelled, her hand finding his naturally. I trust you," she said quietly. "And I choose this bond not because it was fate, but because I want to face life with you." A smile, genuine and unguarded, crossed Kale's face. For the first time, Leora saw him completely without armor, without the mask of the alpha, as a man who had been waiting for someone to share his strength and his heart. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of healing and understanding. The Moonshade Pack, once burdened by the curse, now moved freely and with renewed vigor. The bond between Kale and Leora grew stronger with every passing day, built on trust, courage, and mutual respect. When they returned to Eldoria, the people watched in awe as they appeared, not as prisoner and captor, but as equals, united by choice and shared strength. Whispers of admiration and curiosity followed them, but Kale and Leora paid little mind. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger, their hearts intertwined in a bond that was unbreakable. Yet even in this moment of triumph, Leora knew that life would continue to test them. The world was vast, filled with unseen dangers and lingering shadows. But she also knew that with Kale by her side, with the bond they had forged through courage and choice, they could face anything. Standing on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the city bathed in morning light, Kale spoke softly. "The world believes we are free, yet darkness never forgets. Are we ready for what comes next?" Leora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. She felt the warmth, the strength, and the certainty that had grown between them. "We face it together," she said firmly. "No matter what comes, we face it as one." Kale's eyes softened, and for the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to relax completely. The bond that had begun in fear and prophecy had transformed into something far greater: trust, respect, and the possibility of love that could withstand any challenge. As the sun rose over Eldoria, painting the sky in gold and rose, Leora and Kale stood side by side, hearts steady, hands entwined, ready to face the future. Uncertain, unpredictable, but undeniably theirs. The curse had ended, the test had been passed, and a new chapter of their lives had begun. One built not on fear or obligation, but on choice, courage, and the unbreakable bond that had been forged in the shadows and tempered by fire. And somewhere deep in the forest of Moonshade, the trees whispered a quiet truth: that love, when chosen freely and faced bravely, could break any curse, conquer any darkness, and light the path even through the deepest shadows.